talk to you today about emotional authenticity. So I'm just going to jump right in and ask you, what is it exactly, and how is it different from emotional intelligence?
Great question. The simplest way to explain the difference is to think of a puzzle. What's the first thing you do when you build a puzzle? The border, right?
Yes, if you're smart, yes.
Yeah, in part because it's so easy, right? Doesn't require much effort.
Mhm.
But if all you did was the border, would you have the full picture?
Not at all.
That's the difference between emotional intelligence and emotional authenticity. Emotional intelligence gives you the border. Emotional authenticity gives you the full picture. I mean, look, I wouldn't have a career if they hadn't coined that phrase and made it socially acceptable for us to talk about emotions. So I'm not always the best communicator. When I talk, I get so excited that sometimes I could be condescending. It's not my intent. So
Yeah.
if any of that comes out, that's just my trauma that I'm still working on. But
Mhm.
um, their process was based off a schematic of the brain that was disproven before the book was ever written. So that's one of the problems. The other thing is they lightly suggest that if you have an emotional reaction, it might be something from your childhood. Like they don't give you any process to actually achieve the four areas of emotional intelligence that they claim. Well, emotional authenticity, it's simple. Anytime you have an emotional reaction, you're always reliving your childhood. They don't tell
Mhm.
you that. Emotional authenticity shows you the science of that's all emotions are learned. We're not born with them. And so they are constructs that come from the state, the condition our body's in, the childhood, the parents we were raised by, and then society, the definitions of what was going on in society. And so whenever you react, you ask yourself three questions. What am I feeling? And then I provide a feelings wheel for all my clients or people in my classes. So one thing people don't realize is, and another thing emotional intelligence doesn't tell you is 70% of the people on the planet don't even feel. They're that detached emotionally. So they begin by developing what's called specificity and granularity to their emotions. They begin learning. So they look at that wheel and it starts off very simple in the middle, good, or I mean, happy, sad, scared, things like that. But as you get further in the wheel and as you grow in your emotional authenticity, bad becomes consternated, frustrated, um, irritated. Well, each one of those has a different feeling marker to it. So the next question you ask yourself is, where in my body do I feel it? Because we store all emotional trauma in our body.
Mhm.
Then you ask yourself, what's my first memory of having this thought of, say, irritation, this feeling in my body, which maybe is in my shoulder, my stomach, whatever. What's my first memory of that? And I tell people, write it down. It's usually something in the last 2 to 5 years, pretty recent.
Mhm.
Okay, write the next one down, that the memory before that. And you keep tracing it back, and eventually you remember I was 4 years old and I wanted a cookie, or I wanted to play something, or um, whatever it was. That's where you learned that emotional feeling. And so you're reliving your childhood trauma against yourself every time you do that. And then emotional authenticity, which emotional intelligence doesn't provide, is a process to restructure that emotional feeling marker. So it stops working, it starts to work for you and no longer works against you, because emotions are basically built off what's called a concept, a simulation, concept, and definition. And so when you have that moment, well, let me say a little bit more. The first 7 years of life, we're in a theta brainwave state. It's which is the same as hypnosis.
Mhm.
So all we're doing is downloading the emotions of those around us in the society, mostly our parents. So that's what's creating the simulation, concept, and definition of emotional concepts. So Like I use this example. In my house, table manners. If you chewed with your mouth open or talked with your mouth full, my dad went ballistic. So the simulation concept and definition is poor table manners means shame and you're not accepted in this family. Well, somebody who grew up in the East, China or Japan, if you don't slurp your food and if their stuff isn't flying, well, now you're being rude. And so they
Mhm.
have a different simulation concept and definition for that emotion. And so it's much more involved in that. And there are many other aspects and ways. Actually, on my website, I showed 10 ways in which, and in my latest book, Your Journey to Yourself, I give a complete breakdown of the differences between emotional intelligence, emotional authenticity. Also, the most popular therapy out there is cognitive behavioral therapy. And all
Mhm.
that does is suppress emotions. Yet every
Mhm.
single thought and action we ever take always starts with an emotion or feeling. So it's a band-aid approach. It's not dealing with the real issue. And that's why it's very limited in its
Yeah.
overall success. It can be helpful, but you're
Yeah.
not dealing with the root cause of your struggle. So
I
that's a
totally
short
agree
overview.
with you on the CBT, and that's something that was used on me, a form of it anyway, for years, and
Yeah.
it never worked. All it did was it kind of changed my behavior for a time, and then as soon as I kind of relaxed again, I would just go right back to the way I was because it wasn't changing who I was on the inside. It was just, like you said, a band-aid solution. So that really brings me to my next question, and I love how you said that emotions or feelings, they really are feelings because we have them in our body. But I wanted to ask you, you say you become what you feel, not what you think. Can you
Yeah.
elaborate on that?
Yeah, we've known for decades neuroscientifically that feeling comes a split second, or not even like milliseconds before any thought. Every thought starts with an emotional or a feeling reaction. And so that's my frustration in the personal development field. Almost all of it is geared around changing your thoughts. It's a complete waste of time. Even as you're sitting there generating a thought, that thought is is happening from a feeling. And here's a perfect example. I wrote about this in my latest book. I was trying to describe this process and besides just science, because people don't care about, the neuroscience and all that stuff. You know, well, I went downstairs to make coffee because I was frustrated. I I I was struggling with the way I was feeling as I was writing it. There was anger in it, and I couldn't get myself out of it. So I'm like, let's just take a break, go make coffee.
Mhm.
So I go downstairs, and as soon as I got back up, I went, oh my God, I just did it. So in the book, I shared the story of my journey of getting coffee. I went downstairs and I realized, see, this is what people don't realize. In every waking moment, we're taking in sensory information from all over the place that's creating emotions. So as I'm making coffee, my feet are standing on the cold tile floor. That triggered a memory, and this is where my anger came from. That triggered a memory. When I was a kid, I ran extremely high fevers. And so my mom used to submerge me in ice baths. I hate the cold. It
Mhm.
produces severe rage. Then I grabbed the warmth of the coffee, which calmed me down, but I saw popcorn on the table, went over, grabbed a mouthful, immediately felt shame and guilt because I've been working on losing weight. Now I'm feeling that. Turn the corner, head up the stairs, a loud car goes by and honks. Just irritated me because, and then I remembered my dad had a booming voice and would scream out my name, Kenneth, whenever I was in trouble. And my older brother used to scream in my ear when I was asleep. So I was having all of these emotions just getting a cup of coffee that
Wow.
were all based on sensory input. And that's what people don't realize is James points out, 95 to 97% of our adult life, all we're doing is reliving the subconscious programming of childhood. And that's
Mhm.
just what I did. And people are just like, well, I got coffee. I don't know why I'm frustrated. Well, that's what emotional authenticity teaches you. What am I feeling? Where in my body? What's my first memory? Do you see how I was able to retrace everything, which then explained the trigger of the cold, the shame from the food, the loud noises. The reason I was angry and frustrated is I was stuck in some pretty traumatic moments from childhood. And
Mhm.
that's why I couldn't get myself to where I wanted to be. Well, then I used the process I teach to reshape all of that and was able to then go, oh, just tell the story of what you just experienced.